Since April, Donald Trump has been pushing hard for new trade agreements after announcing tariffs that hit both friends and rivals of the United States. His administration presented these actions as an effort to reset global trade, arguing that longtime partners should give more back to the American economy. In the months that followed, several deals were signed, which Trump described as historic victories that showed America's influence in the world. But not long after, those same agreements began to face heavy criticism. Some close allies questioned whether the deals actually benefited them, and a few even started pulling away. Surprisingly, the pushback wasn't from U.S. rivals. It was from long-standing partners with strong military, economic, and diplomatic ties to Washington. At the heart of the dispute is a major trade deal that was meant to reduce tariffs and increase investment, but instead, it has become a source of division. Instead of bringing stability, the deal has triggered concerns about financial risks, political tension, and fresh disputes across the Indo-Pacific. South Korea's president, Lee Jae-myung, has openly warned that accepting Washington's current terms could drag his country into a crisis as severe as the financial crash of the late 1990s. Yesterday, President Lee issued his strongest criticism yet of the U.S. demands, questioning whether the deal once promoted by Donald Trump's administration could ever move forward. Speaking in an interview with Reuters, he made it clear that South Korea is ready to walk away unless Washington shows flexibility. The heart of the conflict is a verbal agreement struck in July. The U.S. promised to roll back tariffs placed during Trump's presidency, while South Korea was expected to pour $350 billion into the American economy. On the surface, it seemed like a win for both sides. Trump could showcase billions in foreign investment as proof of his America First trade strategy, while South Korea would gain relief from tariffs and smoother access for industries like cars and electronics. But as President Lee pointed out, the difficulties lie in the fine print. The U.S. has insisted that South Korea's $350 billion investment be paid in cash and allocated under Washington's direction. In effect, this would give the Trump administration control over where and how the money is spent. President Lee cautioned that such a large withdrawal of funds could destabilize South Korea's financial system. Without protective measures, like a currency swap agreement, the country could face a shock similar to the 1997 Asian financial crisis, when it had to seek an emergency bailout from the International Monetary Fund. That crisis left deep scars, years of corporate restructuring, widespread job losses, and a steep drop in living standards. To prevent history from repeating itself, South Korea has suggested creating a currency swap line with the U.S., which would act as a financial safety net. This arrangement would allow the Bank of Korea to exchange its currency directly with the U.S. Federal Reserve. If dollars were urgently needed to stabilize markets, Seoul could access them immediately instead of depending on unpredictable investors or market swings. This safeguard is critical because large cash outflows, like the $350 billion demand, can weaken the Korean won. If too much money leaves the country at once, the currency's value could plummet. That would make imports costlier, increase debt burdens for businesses that borrowed in dollars, and risk triggering investor panic. A swap line would serve as a safety valve, giving South Korea access to U.S. dollars when needed to calm its markets and avoid a financial spiral. The U.S. has extended such agreements to key allies before, like Japan and the European Central Bank, and even to other major economies during times of crisis. But in this case, Washington has shown little interest in offering Seoul the same protection, leaving South Korea vulnerable if the trade deal moves forward without changes. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, speaking for the Trump administration, argued that South Korea should simply follow Japan's example. Earlier this year, Tokyo struck its own deal with Washington. But as President Lee emphasized, Japan's financial situation is far stronger. It holds more than twice South Korea's $410 billion in foreign reserves, the yen is widely used internationally, and Japan already has a standing swap line with the U.S. South Korea lacks these advantages. Demanding the same terms, Lee warned, is both unrealistic and risky. Tensions have been heightened further by a recent U.S. immigration raid, where more than 300 South Korean workers were detained at a Hyundai battery plant in Georgia. Photos of South Korean workers in shackles spread rapidly, sparking outrage back home and raising doubts about the safety of Korean investments in the U.S. President Lee acknowledged the public anger but urged calm, saying he did not believe Donald Trump personally ordered the raid. Instead, he described it as an overstep by U.S. officials. Trump reportedly offered assurances that the workers could stay, and Washington later issued an apology. Still, the incident left a lasting mark, reinforcing skepticism in Seoul about America's reliability as a partner. The strain carries extra weight because the U.S. and South Korea are tied not only through trade but also through security. Around 28,500 American troops remained stationed on the Korean peninsula under an alliance dating back to the Korean War. Lee stressed that military cooperation will continue, but he also noted how the Trump administration's decision to separate defense issues from trade negotiations highlights its transactional approach. South Korea has already agreed to contribute more toward its defense, yet trade remains the sticking point. In his Reuters interview, Lee also touched on relations with North Korea, China, and Russia. His comments painted a bleak picture of inter-Korean ties. Pyongyang has rejected Seoul's outreach, and Lee admitted that the chances for renewed dialogue remain slim. At the same time, growing cooperation between North Korea, Russia, and China is creating new strategic challenges. Earlier this month, Kim Jong-un appeared alongside Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping at a military parade in Beijing, a clear signal of strengthening ties among the three nations. President Lee described the situation as a troubling divide between a socialist bloc on one side and a capitalist, democratic camp, including South Korea, on the other. He warned that this split could trigger a cycle of escalation, the US, Japan, and South Korea tightening their security cooperation, while Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang move even closer together. For South Korea, sitting at the crossroads of these rivalries, the risks could not be more serious. Lee's own dealings with Donald Trump have been complicated. Their first summit in August ended without a joint statement or concrete results, but Lee said he felt he had built a strong personal connection with the US president. He even praised Trump's response to the Hyundai raid, calling it responsible. Yet trust has limits. Trump has publicly insisted that he will personally decide how South Korea's investments are managed, an approach that Lee argues raises doubts about whether the projects make commercial sense. Seoul has stressed that any commitments must be economically viable, but so far, lower-level negotiations have failed to resolve the disagreement. Lee admitted the deadlock could stretch into the next year, prolonging uncertainty for businesses, financial markets, and the alliance itself. The memory of South Korea's 1997 financial crisis hangs heavily over today's debate. Back then, the economy buckled under the weight of short-term foreign debt, forcing Seoul to turn to the International Monetary Fund for a bailout. That collapse still shapes how Korean leaders think about economic risks. The crisis revealed deep flaws in the system. Powerful conglomerates, known as chaebols, had taken on massive foreign loans with little regard for profitability. When global markets shifted and investors pulled out, the entire structure crumbled. The Korean won plummeted, foreign reserves dried up, and some of the country's largest corporations went bankrupt. To restore stability, the government agreed to the IMF's strict conditions, restructuring banks, cutting spending, raising interest rates, and accepting mass layoffs. While the program eventually restored market confidence, the social toll was immense. Unemployment soared, thousands of companies shut down, and ordinary Koreans bore the heaviest burden. One enduring symbol of that period was the 1998 gold collecting campaign, when millions of citizens donated jewelry to help the country repay its foreign debt. For today's leaders, the lesson is simple. Avoid repeating that painful chapter at all costs. Large outflows of capital without safeguards can destabilize an economy overnight. In 1997, the Korean won tumbled from about 800 to more than 1,700 per US dollar, wiping out savings and sharply increasing the cost of foreign debt. Accepting Washington's demand for $350 billion in cash investments, without protections like a currency swap, could expose South Korea to the same vulnerability. For President Lee, this is not just a financial concern but an existential one. The wounds of the 1997 crash remain fresh, and no South Korean government can risk repeating them. His warnings are grounded in history, not rhetoric. A sudden outflow of $350 billion could spark capital flight, sink the won, and shatter investor confidence. When asked if Seoul is prepared to abandon the deal entirely, Lee avoided giving a definitive answer but left little doubt about his position. He remarked that between blood allies, there must be at least a minimum of rationality. In diplomatic terms, it was a pointed warning. Unless Washington shows flexibility, South Korea is prepared to walk away. The stakes are high on both sides. For Donald Trump, losing a $350 billion investment pledge would weaken what he has promoted as a landmark trade achievement. For South Korea, rejecting the deal could safeguard financial stability but would also risk greater friction with its closest security ally. This dispute is not just a quarrel between two nations, it reflects a broader shift in the global order, where alliances are tested by economic nationalism, domestic pressures, and great power rivalry. Seoul's pushback sends a clear signal. Even Washington's closest partners are no longer willing to shoulder unlimited costs in the name of alliance. The message is unmistakable. The era of automatic alignment is over. As the Indo-Pacific becomes the center of global competition, the choices made in both Seoul and Washington will echo far beyond their borders.